Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Today's guest, as of yesterday, hasn't seen even one of our webcasts, so I needed to warn him, just so he was not caught off guard, that I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. And that requires a word of warning to the folks who are joining us maybe for the first time. This is not a safe space for you if you are easily offended by having your ideas challenged. This is broadcast number 93. 93, Ron. And this week we have William Jackson III to talk about a workshop he is presenting at the upcoming EM&R conference at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, which is, you might have guessed it, in New Orleans. And it is titled Ancient Near Eastern Religions and Contemporary Cults. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is still Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast.
Yeah, they can't get rid of me. Welcome, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out and saw its shadow. And so we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors today include the Designer Jesus Collection. You don't have to be embarrassed by your church's Jesus anymore. Just visit any one of the Designer Jesus Collection shows and pick your own Designer Jesus. And the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. And if you want to ensure continued access to this program, if you like it, if you don't like it, and you just want to annoy people with it, please go to MidwestOutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. MidwestOutreach.org, and find that yellow donate button. Thank you very much, and welcome, William.
Welcome,
hello.
William.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Well, and when we are done, you will know you have been had.
Yes.
You are a student currently at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary in their apologetics program. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, and Ron was very impressed with that
Yes.
library that you have around you. As students, they're struggling usually financially, but you have this terrific library going on there. But then we found out that's not your library.
You could have just let us think it was yours. You could have done that.
In my defense, I have a pretty impressive library.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay, that's just not it.
That's just not it. No.
There you go.
Well, as we're kind of getting started here, I want to let people know that you are doing one of the presentations, one of the workshops at the upcoming EM&R, Evangelical Ministries to New Religions, workshops. And the conference will be at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary in New Orleans, and that is April 27 and 28.
That's correct. Correct.
And you can get information on the website, www.emnr.org, and sign up and attend. The theme is Leaving a Legacy. And in this case, you're kind of talking about the legacy of Near Eastern religions and contemporary cults. First, what got you interested in, of all things, apologetics?
Well, that is kind of a wild ride, but long story short, I began in my undergrad. I did music in my undergrad, and through the persuasion of my college minister at my church that I went to, he was studying Christian apologetics at the seminary at the time, and I wondered, what was that? So over time, God began to kind of explain to me what it was, and he began to present me with opportunities to witness to classmates, to other peers and such, of all kinds of backgrounds. It didn't matter whether they were of a different religion, whether they were religious or not. And God really just began to build in my heart, a love for his word, but also a defense of the faith and for promoting and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Mm. And of course, apologetics means never having to say you're sorry for what you believe, right? unless you practice this new brand of humble apologetics in which you begin with saying you're sorry, right? Well, anyways, so yeah, that's apologetics is defending the faith. And so how did your pastor get interested in this? And why did he think this would be something you would really like to do?
Well, I seemed very inquisitive because I, like most people, didn't know what the word apologetics meant. So
You wanted to know.
I did want to know. And I was also one of those people who actually was extremely hungry for God's word. So he, at the time, again, like I said, he was studying apologetics, and he gave me my first book, which was Who Made God? Ravi Zacharias and Norman Geisler. And I fell in love as I read that book. You know, God really just began to open so much truth to me. He began to open so much understanding to me about how do we minister and how we see the truth around us. And the fact of the matter is, you know, the Christian faith is the true faith. So, yeah, throughout that time, you know, and just prayer and continuous practice and learning, he began to really just call me and use me for that purpose.
So, I'm intrigued here. You know, apologetics, when I think of it, is we're defending the faith against, you know, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, atheists, maybe Muslims, people. For me, it was, I was in a new neighborhood long ago, and I was a teenager. I'd just become a Christian, and we had these people ringing our doorbells, knocking on our doors, and they were from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. They're from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they presented another Jesus, another gospel, another spirit, you know, and it was, for me, it was like, whoa, did I believe in the right thing? I wanted to know. But your title, the title of your message is going to be Ancient Near Eastern Religions and Contemporary, I don't see the rest of the title here.
Contemporary cults.
So in other words, we have contemporary cults like the ones that were coming to my door. What does ancient Near Eastern religion have to do with that?
Well, ancient Near Eastern religion has a whole lot to do with the influences of practices today, cult or religions in general. First off, being that they are rooted primarily in society and their values. Basically, say for instance, the Egyptians, one of the most prominent cultures of the time, they based a lot of their living and their societal values and their architecture, as well as their shrines and everything, based off of some kind of deity. Egyptians, their deities are depicted as beings that had either human or animalistic qualities. Such as, for example, you had Anubis, the god of the dead. He is depicted as a god, a man body with a dog head, or a jackal. And the reason why is because when they would bury or embalm people, you know, mummify them after they died, they would see dogs or jackals walking around the tombs all the time. So they called it Anubis because they saw dogs, and that's what they depicted as the person who guides the afterlife and the dead. So that's number one thing. They depict, you know, what they see in their society as something to be worshipped. And they also, as far as combining this with contemporary religions, they create their own values. You know, throughout the dynasties, the pharaohs would have reform in their religious beliefs and ideologies all the time. So their morals were changing all the time, as well as their societal and economic practices. They changed things based off of what they believed all the time. And also, when you look at the contemporary cultures of today, you'll see this, whether it's the Mormons or whether it's the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have their own sect of different, you know, beliefs as far as who the gods are, how, you know, humanity relates to the gods, and so on and so forth. And also, with that being said, you have this concept of merging all kinds of ideas and morals to fit one's own niche. Let me just quote what the Apostle Paul said. He said, "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths." So this was from 2 Corinthians, I believe. So Paul mentioned later in the New Testament things that he already kind of knew from the past, you know, that the religious practices and the ideas from the past were always affecting mankind and causing mankind to have an influence to make their own belief systems. And the problem also is that he quoted this in Romans chapter 1, verses 26 through 32, when he says that man, you know, has given themselves over to the beliefs of the images of man, the worship of man, the worship of animals, worshiping the creation rather than the creator. And this also just blends it into the concept of, well, if we can create this image of something to worship or something to give ourselves in completely devotion to, then we can also blend our own philosophies and worldviews to suit our own needs. And if there is no strong basis for what we believe, then we can alter it anytime we choose.
Well,
Don, as William was talking, I was thinking, one of our sponsors who would be really interested in this would have been the Heresy Conservation Board, Heresy Recycling. Because what William is talking about is, that the cults that we have today, they're going back and they're kind of scavenging from past cults, past religions, really.
Right.
That's what they're doing.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead, Don. I'm sorry.
Right there. Well, and in some cases, they overtly bring those religions into something new that they are creating. Joseph Smith, for example, claims that he translated the Book of Mormon from a document that was written in Reformed Egyptian. Right. So you have this tie back to the Egyptian culture. The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in the late 1800s, early 1900s had predicted the end of or the Battle of Armageddon for 1914 based on measuring the insides of the pyramids, which Russell called the God's Bible in stone, God's stone witness. And we have the same thing with William Marion Branham. The Branhamites also used pyramids in his teachings, as though somehow God used that. So you have that tie back to Egypt again. That's kind of interesting.
Well, the thing that comes to my mind, you used the word syncretism. I don't know if you used it when you were talking before went on, or since maybe you used it both times.
Yes.
And syncretism is mixing together the teachings of the Bible with the teachings outside the Bible, especially teachings from another worldview, totally alien to the Bible. Paul talks about a day when people will bring in the doctrines of demons. And Paul also says in another place that to worship an idol is to worship a demon. And so basically these religions that are outside of Christianity are inspired by demons, and they're bringing them into the church through this syncretism, through this joining together. And so this is why it's so dangerous.
Correct. Yeah, it's animism. That's exactly what you're talking about. That's animism. That's what the American Indians, they had a very animistic, worship of the spiritual realms and all that kind of things. As a matter of fact, there's a book out called Strange Gods. It's an older book, and the author writes of a time when they were doing ministry. They were doing ministry to Native American groups and people who practice spiritual worship and things of that sort. And he talked about how a time where this young girl who was probably about a little over 100 pounds, they were talking with her, and they had already seen how she was demon possessed at one point, and they saw that she practiced, spirit worship. And this one incident when she was with her father or something, and she had been taken over, and her father, who was over 200 pounds, she wound up picking him up and throwing him through a door, and he had sustained injuries for months. And the whole village was terrified of this. And yes, you're completely right. The animism is completely influenced by demons. Absolutely. And even the Old Testament and the Torah, Moses gives, the law and gives written documents to the people, specifically saying, refrain from the occult, refrain from all these other types of idol worship, because it is the influence of the devil. And you can even see, going as far back as the other religions and the practices of the day, that anything that is not of Yahweh is completely of the enemy. Anything that just practices that out at all, in a sense.
And yet the way that animism in particular seems to have appealed to the church has been through Walt Disney, the Disney movie. What could be more what could be more wholesome and family oriented?
Well, Disney's one of them, but commercial made films. One of the things I haven't done this recently, but in past years, I was fortunate enough to go go down to Cortez, Colorado. It's one of my favorite places in the country, and work with their high school students that are getting ready to go to college. And we would spend the weekend just talking about worldviews. What is a worldview? How does your worldview become informed? Those kinds of things. And I point out a few things. One is we gain our worldviews usually through osmosis. It isn't something you think about. It just comes to you through culture, through media, through films, through books, through radio, through magazines. And every film has some kind of a worldview. As you point out, we're getting it from Disney. You have it in Pocahontas, for example, where she goes and talks with Grandma Willow, who informs her about things to come. And then at the end of the weekend, we watch a film, and I have a particular film I like to watch because there's 3 worldviews represented in it. And it's called Hidalgo, which is about a horse race across the desert. The 3 primary religions are Christianity, Islam, and American Indian, animism. Now, in that film, as you watch it, it's very entertaining. It's a great film. And I asked them at the end, I say, okay, now identify the 3 religions that are named, and which one is the least desirable, evil maybe, which one is the most honorable, and which one is superior. And they thought about it, and they couldn't really tell me. I said, well, think about it. In the film, the bad guys are the Christians. They're the deceivers, the cheaters in the race, all of that kind of stuff. Christians you can't trust. Islam is the most honorable because they protect the American Indian worldview, and at the end they pay homage to it. Animism is held up as the superior idea. I say, now, as you watch the film, all this stuff is coming into you unchecked, unless you are aware that they're communicating a worldview. So it comes into the church that way. You don't jump into heresy one day when you wake up and go, gee, I think I want to become a heretic. Usually, you usually lean into it a little at a time.
Yeah, and Disney does such a good job, and others have too. Of making the animism of Native Americans look so attractive. It's about they try to they make it as they recast it as care for the earth. They respect the land and all that. Well, of course they respect the land. They think it's inhabited by spirits. There was I watched a video where a Native American woman, I'm thinking she might have been from the Lakota tribe, because that's the tribe that was very prominent in the upper Midwest, right near Mount Rushmore. And this woman was literally throwing a fit. I mean, she was on film and she was obviously disgusted, outraged. It was visceral for this person that people would dare. And this is I'm quoting her as nearly as I can remember. They would dare to carve faces into this mountain without first asking the spirit of the mountain whether it wanted those faces carved into it. How dare they do that? Well, now we've gone beyond just respect for the earth and care for the land. We're talking about something that is just, really demonic. That we don't have to ask permission from the spirits. Man was given dominion,
correct,
over the land. But if this is diametrically opposed to the book of Genesis, and it wasn't taken away at the fall. In fact, when Noah was sent forth, he was supposed to continue to try to carry out what Adam was supposed to do. Obviously, now sin was going to make it a lot harder, but it wasn't reversed.
Right.
So anyways, but they recast it. They make it look so attractive, so appealing. Right. So, yeah.
Well, see, and that's the other thing that is a huge weapon in the arsenal of people who want to spread their ideas, is because as people, we are very captivated by art form. We are very captivated by images. We're very captivated, especially through media and through cinema and things of that sort. And when you can portray your message in such a way that kind of, in a sense, makes you gravitate towards those concepts, then yeah, you'll begin to see exactly the same things that we've seen all throughout scriptures. And the thing is that this is not new. And that's why I went to the whole concept of ancient Near Eastern religion as the connection to the things that we still see today, because these things are not new. These things are not new at all. The things we see today, even some of the emerging religions and cults that we probably never heard of and that we need to, kind of study up on more, it's still nothing really new. When you look at it at the core of it, it's still pluralistic. It's still, in a way, blending some kind of aspect of true, real worship unto God with whatever kind of worldview or philosophy you want to throw on top of it. So 1 Corinthians 10:13 says that no temptation has tempted you except what is common to mankind. So at the end of the day, look at Abraham. God called Abraham from Ur, a paganistic society that worshiped other gods. He called him so that he would begin to build God's nation, God's people, so that he could be a blessing, and that this would be a blessing to the earth, so that Yahweh's presence would be felt truly as it should be, away from the falsehood and away from everything else that was created. So at the end of the day, yeah, everything is connected.
Now, you were mentioning the impact on the African American church and community, which I find interesting. I have to tell you, some years ago, there was a radio host here in Chicago, and we had a radio show. She was African American, and we had lunch one day after our show and before hers, and we were kind of talking about cults. And she made this most profound statement to me. She said, "We don't have any cults in the African American church."
We don't have to wait for the punchline. I guess that was
it. Well, that was the punchline. I said, "Well, have you heard of Jehovah's Witnesses?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, but they're not a cult." And I went, "Okay." Have you heard of Nation of Islam? She goes, "Well, yeah, but I know Louis Farrakhan. He's a Christian." I go, "Okay." This is on a Christian radio station, a Christian radio host, supposedly. Right. I had to start just to square one with apologetics on what the actual faith is and what these groups are teaching. She was positively horrified as we went along.
I take it she began to realize that maybe she shouldn't say that anymore.
Well, yeah, she well, at least not to me.
Right.
Well, but the sad thing is that there's so many places you can go in any church, black, white, whatever, where it's just the ignorance is so profound. We had a very godly, I consider him a godly man who was in our church for years. And one day our pastor dared to say something about the Mormon church. Well, they were building a new Mormon church down the street from our church. And he kind of pointed out that, this is not a Christian denomination. These are not people who believe anywhere near the same as what we or our Baptist brethren or our, conservative Methodist Presbyterian brethren, Bible church brethren, whatever they're not even on the same planet as us. Literally. I mean, they believe they came from another planet, and,
true.
And so it's like, and this man, he just said, now this was a different approach, but his thing was, he was raised, you never criticize anybody's religion, no matter what. Well, you know what? If you do that, if you take that approach, then you're going to be basically withholding the gospel from countless people. You're going to withhold from them the ability to distinguish, as the Apostle John said, between the spirit of truth and the spirit of error, which he talks about in 1 John. And that's very dangerous. That's spiritually lethal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, everybody, I think there's this natural tendency. We want to emphasize what we have in common to the point where we err, and tragically and dangerously err on the side of we have everything in common, when we really, regarding eternal things, have next to nothing sometimes.
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
when we talk about some issues like ethnicity and the faith, uh, it does impact different cultures in different ways
Hmm.
to some degree. Now the Apostle Paul, for example, in Acts 20:28 and following, tells the Ephesian elders to watch out for false prophets coming from the outside in, and also for false teachers that would arise from within. So,
Hmm.
the role of the pastor and elders is to be on guard both ways, both directions, because false teachers can be birthed within the group that you're, shepherding, or they can try to filter from the outside. Now, some groups seem to go cross-culturally, let's say. Jehovah's Witnesses, doesn't matter. White, African American, Japanese, Chinese, whatever, they truly can go transculturally with their heresies and fairly effectively. Mormons seem to be more limited, especially prior to 1979. When they were obviously teaching that we're all color-coded based on how valiantly we fought in the big war. They kind of stopped teaching that more recently. But then, to be perfectly honest, it is, the Nation of Islam is not going to do very well in this sort of a white suburban church.
Well, back in the early 80s, I came across a group called the Church of the Aryan Nation.
Ah, right.
Yeah, and so here we have a group that was teaching not only the most virulent, the most malicious, hateful forms of racism I've ever. I mean, I was just appalled. I didn't think this kind of thing existed anymore. I thought, these people were like the goons in the KKK. They were just. Of course, I was kind of naive then. I didn't realize how they were still around either. But the Church of the Aryan Nation was extremely anti-Semitic and, of course, racist as well. And it's not going to appeal to anybody outside, European Americans. And the thing that they taught, which I found so amazing, you have to be so ignorant of history and the Bible to believe this, is that white Europeans are the true physical descendants of the biblical Jews,
right?
And that the current Jews are phonies. They were
right.
They were not.
But we have a group now, which we just touched on briefly, or at the beginning.
Yeah, Black Hebrew Israelites.
And they take the same thing, and they apply it to African Americans or Africans in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they believe that African Americans were the original Jews. Period. No argument. Well, there's no denying the strong heritage that African Americans have, especially with the Christianity, which I believe is something that we can use as a very powerful tool in ministering to, the Black Hebrew Israelites or Egyptians, because we have a strong heritage going back as far as Asia Minor and Africa and Turkey, from spreading the gospel to America.
It's in the Bible. One of the first. Right there, it's one of the first converts.
Exactly. Look at your map. Look at your map.
Right, right.
So I think the problem is that because with the 1950s and the 1960s, with the transatlantic slave trade, and all the oppression that went on throughout years, they want to automatically hinge on the fact that when a white man had the Bible in his hand and a whip in the other, then that is clearly the faith of the white man. So at the end of the day, don't trust that. The whole concept behind it, like, as I said, these Islamic, I guess, splinter groups, especially in the minorities, whether it's Egyptologists or Kemetic science, all of these groups are primarily hinged on supremacy over the white man, over the oppressor. It is not really about reconciliation. It's not about peace with all nations or anything like that. No, it's really just about retribution. That's all it's about. And at the end of the day, you can even look back at Egyptian history with Ramses or whatever, the oppression of Egyptian slaves. It's not to say that was like inherently a very clear racist mentality that he had, but obviously he didn't view the Jews as, equal people or with the same amount of humanity as themselves. Why? Because not only did they feel this way, that they could oppress people at their will, but because their gods, they saw that their gods gave them the power, especially the king, who was the representative and the chief worshiper of the gods. Anything that was against the king's word, you were subject to death, period, because the king had direct authority from the gods to do whatever he wanted. So, especially when you translate that down to our society today, if you see people historically who were oppressed by a certain people, then why would they give over to that faith? You know, and so there's a clear misunderstanding of the Jesus that is historically and accurately portrayed throughout time. And, you know, again, like I said, the thing is that we have to really hinge back on a strong root and heritage of, you know, whether it's minority groups, you know, African, Turkey, or Asia Minor, and how Christianity was actually brought from those places, you know, and things of that sort.
And I don't want to ever minimize ever the horrible evils that white people did in advancing, promoting race-based slavery. That's what made the slavery of the Americas, not just the United States, but the slavery of the Western Hemisphere so cruel and so unique compared to slaveries of other times. Even today, slavery is still going on, but what made ours rather unique was just the racial basis for it. And it was, I look at it as part of a spiritual warfare that was going on at that time. And now we are dealing with the residual effect of the terrible atrocities that were committed. We're dealing with the fallout. And part of the fallout is groups like Black Hebrew Israelites, things like that.
Well, and one of the things that I notice is in each case, they want to kind of remodel Jesus to fit a new paradigm. Whatever it is that they're doing, they want to remodel Jesus, kind of redesign him to fit what they want him to be.
And that's if they claim Jesus at all. That's the funny thing about it, is since the early 1970s or whatever, when the groups really started to form, all of their different groups spread across the nations don't all profess the same things. Like if you actually literally minister to some of these groups online, you'll say, well, you believe this or that, but like no, we don't, because just because you heard one of the, you know, I guess apostles or whatever talking about certain things in a Walmart the other day, you know, and then you minister to someone else in like the group online or something, they're gonna say something different. You see, their doctrines are not consistent with one another at all, you know, because, you know, number one, they probably are constantly editing them or redoing them or something. But the problem is that you had this issue of when you paint a picture of when, like, say the historically white picture of Jesus, right? That's a big turnoff for them. That's even if they even affirm who Jesus was. They don't affirm the teachings of the Apostle Paul at all. They primarily stick to the Old Testament strictly. They use Deuteronomy 28:31 very, you know, usefully, the passage on the Egyptian, you know, Exodus, and this one group is going to be left and is going to rise up and take over and things like that, which they take completely out of context. But when you can see it in culture, you know, like the movie that came out recently, the Marvel movie that is one of the highest grossing, Black Panther. Oh, you have no idea how much of an empowering thing that was for the Black community, because people don't realize that it wasn't just about, you know, the story itself, but it was literally one of those empowering things for, you know, this people, because not only was the Black Panther movie written in Oakland, California, which is where the original Black Panthers of the 1970s were, you know, when it started and everything like that, but you also got to consider, you know, some of the messages that are written, like some of the main plots of the movie was about, you know, rising up over oppression, you know, of the white man. The main enemy, and I hate this, if you haven't seen it, sorry, spoiler alert, but the main enemy, Eric Killmonger, is literally talking to the Black Panther, you know, T'Challa, about how, you know, you have all this technology, you have all of this power and stuff like that in your hidden little village of Wakanda, and you were over there while people in America, Black people in America, were being oppressed and stuff like that, and we could have been rising up over this kind of thing. You know, imagine the resonance that had with the Black community. Like, just imagine that. So it's not even a matter of whether or not, you know, we don't deserve justice. No, all people deserve to be treated equally, fairly, and justly as God made them in his image. But at the same time, you know, you have artists such, especially like in the rap industry, like Kendrick Lamar, who wrote the entire Black Panther soundtrack, who actually has family who are Black Hebrew Israelites and stuff, and they promote these messages of, no, raise up. And he doesn't even claim that he's Black anymore. No, he says, don't call me Black. He says, call me a Israelite. That's what he says. Call me Israelite.
Well, we do want to hear, though, because we have a sponsor that kind of wants to be all things to all people and has a new product we've been talking about for a while.
Yeah, and the one, sometimes they do find it culturally easier to make inroads if you do stick with Jesus, but you know what? There's still problems with that. And we want to talk about that. Do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows of churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Just remember to observe the attendance requirements. The cost of admission is your eternal soul. Required attire semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. Yes, the Designer Jesus Collection. London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City. You don't want to miss it. And I'm wondering, is there so it sounds like there's no Black Hebrew Israelite Jesus, or is there? Maybe we should include him in the fashion show.
He's definitely not white. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh no, we have to.
No. But you can have him your way, kind of like Burger King.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you would call him technically.
I mean, we want to be inclusive here.
I guess we got to fish around for a name.
Black Hebrew Israelite Jesus, he must exist, right?
Technically, everyone, especially in pop culture, have always just called him Black Jesus. There you go. I didn't see that, so I guess you can just throw Black Jesus in there.
Well, we'll find.
If you watch the show Blackish with Anthony Anderson, you'll see that they say Black Jesus.
Okay. What's the name of that show again?
Blackish. It's on ABC. Blackish with Anthony Anderson.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, so we're gonna have to craft one of those to fit him in, because we know he's not Danish for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the saddest days of my life, or experiences, maybe not the whole day, when I mentioned to you before the show that I used to go down to Cook County Jail and do Bible studies with the chaplain's office and the inmates. One day, I think it was my first year in Bible college. We're in these groups, and one of the inmates, I don't know if this was the first, second, or third time he'd seen me in a group. He pulled me to the side, and he had a question, and he wanted to know if Adam and Eve were white or what. He was really burdened by this question, and I think it was he was feeling inferior, about his skin color. He didn't have to say it. I mean, it's like I'm looking at him and saying, they could have been green for all I know. Right. It's like, it was like I was thinking, how big of a burden is this brother carrying over this issue? I said, well, one thing I'm pretty sure of is that they weren't white. I mean, it just seems so absolutely unlikely when you look at all the different shades and colors of humanity. Why would just this one?
Right, and we are all offspring of Adam and Eve.
Right, and plus, if you were to go back 500 years, a half a millennium, the dominant so-called race on the planet was not white. It was Middle Eastern Muslim. The Ottoman Empire was the biggest, baddest, bogeyman on the planet. They were the most powerful force. They controlled trade between China and Europe. They were much more powerful than any European country. And so, if you were to go back 500 years and ask the average person anywhere in the world, what's the strongest nation? They wouldn't have thought France, Britain. There was no United States to think about yet. And if you go back to other different periods in history, you would get different answers. The Egyptians at one point, the Babylonians at another point, the Chinese had a very strong culture for a while. So, we're at this very narrow bandwidth in history where there's this illusion that whites have always been dominant. No, it's like the batting of an eye,
Right.
in terms of history.
Yeah.
So,
well, in fact, it's William pointed out, if you look at the map of the early church, what you discover is a lot of it heralded from Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the early church fathers were Africans.
And during the early church times, the white Europeans were barbarians.
Right.
They were just, they were considered uncouth, unkempt, they were definitely illiterate. They were, this is, all the way up through the barbarian invasions. They were the people you didn't want to be neighbors to,
Mm-hmm.
So we somehow cleaned up our act over time. Took a while. But not completely. We've never you can't clean up your act completely without Jesus. So.
Right.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and just to touch back on the concept of why the ancient practices still have such impact on what societies do today, even if they don't claim certain religions or whatever, even if they don't claim it, you can still see how the same mentality of why some of those religions were formed are still around today. I mean, especially syncretism. When we look back at the account in Kings when, Elijah was on Mount Carmel, or even when you look at Baal worship of the time, you see Baal, who, was primarily the chief god, one of the chief gods in Babylonian culture, and the things that he represented, and especially things like fertility and, dominance and all those things like that. And the Israelites, they clung to those types of things, and it's because you guys were mentioning earlier how much not only the ignorance, but also how some of the things have crept into the local church. And, see, that's where Elijah raised his voice very strongly about that. Mm-hmm. Because once he called upon Yahweh to rain fire down on his altar, he actually answered. But those other ones, they weren't. They were just probably sitting around for an hour watching them embarrass themselves, cut themselves, and bleed and dance and scream and wail. And the one true God, Yahweh, he actually does act and he manifests himself. That's the one thing that I think Abdu Murray said before he passed away. The late Abdu Murray, he said, especially in regards to when he was speaking about the Islamic religion. He said, you can look at across the span of all these other practices and whatever you think you believe, but at the end of the day, no other God in creation has manifested himself to all humanity.
In history, in actual events in history.
Yeah. No, and has spoken clearly and has also manifested himself in flesh, with Jesus Christ. So, at the end of the day, when we base our faith and our beliefs and our practices on things that are not evidential or not true or made up or anything like that, it constantly crumbles before itself. Because, anything that you believe, you're actually going to live it out. You can see syncretism all over you. They have gay churches and they have, all kinds of other occult that so-called claim that some form of Christianity or some kind of faith, but then they blend contrary things into their religions, and this is why it is still rampant today. It's still exploding, and we have to be very careful, and we have to care enough to minister to people. And you're right, we can't keep silent about this stuff, especially in our own churches, because people fall away, especially in minority groups. They fall away so quickly. So we have to not only be educated, but we have to care in order to minister to people with grace.
Now, I don't want to take away your thunder, but I'd like you to talk about connections between, when I say take away your thunder from what you're going to present at the conference.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
But if you can make, I don't know, one or two connections between the ancient beliefs and the modern cults. And before you do that, I want to mention, I was showing this to Don and William before the program. This is a very big book here. It's well over, Yeah, it's about 700 pages, and they're very big pages. It's entitled Ancient Near Eastern Texts relating to the Old Testament. Now, these are just the ones relating to the Old Testament. There are other ancient texts, the Nag Hammadi documents that were discovered, generation ago or so. I mean, there are tons and tons and tons of documents that go back to ancient times. So when people ask the question,
does it teach you how to walk like an Egyptian?
Yes, it does. It has right there, walk like an, yeah. And of course, we're talking ancient Egyptians now. We must distinguish, but the people might ask, well, how do we know what these people believed? Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, the beliefs never really went away. They were just transmitted through other channels. But in addition to that, we can go back now and confirm that, these beliefs that kind of, I don't know, weaseled their ways, eventually into the church, are pretty much the same things that the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, and you mentioned the Akkadians and other national groups. So we have this documented, and I was going to ask you to kind of make some connect the dots between some of these groups.
No problem. Well, some of the ancient ones, especially even the Mesopotamian ones, they had over 560 gods. Some of their primary ones being Tiamat. Marduk was the chief god of Babylon. And also you can look at Hinduism, which they have over 330 million gods. Mm-hmm. And you can see how, much like the Egyptians, their depictions of gods are in some kind of image. They're in some kind of image. They either depict man or they depict some kind of animal. There's clearly animalistic gods in the Hinduism, religion and things of that sort. And also you can see some of the stories alone, about what these gods are, what they do, and all these kinds of things. And the problem with it that I found that especially their deities, they act way too much like people. They act too much, and they depict humanity. They don't depict like supreme deity and sovereignty over creation. Their morals are not consistent. The gods can either die or it can be resurrected. That's especially in Egyptian culture, or even Sumerians or Akkadians, or in even in the Hinduist religion. They have certain attributes and such. They have limitations and all these types of things. You can see it. We can become gods in some of the cults that we have today. And ultimately, there were similar stories in the ancient religions as well. So the problem that I'm finding constantly is that they're constantly just changing the story or adding on to what they think is what it means to be divine. They're adding on to what they believe makes divinity. And it's always going to be stemmed from some concept formulated by humanity, whether they can ascend or whether they have the power to do this or do that, or whether they believe that the gods will bless them with certain things. And ultimately, it falls short every time, because not only do we see morals and we see ethics constantly compromised in those types of stories and those beliefs, but we can see how it still translates today, how such beliefs in things that aren't evidential will ultimately plummet. They do not represent objective moral truth. They do not represent and do not explain the condition of humanity. Why? Because there's such pluralism. There is no consistent thought process behind what is humanity and what is its relationship to God. There's none.
Yeah, the ancient gods were just like big people.
Exactly. And and also you got to consider the gods that created creation, especially in the accounts of A&E, different religions and such. Some of their gods, the primordial ones, namely, were not even that important. The ones that created, life and such, they weren't that important. It wasn't until the political gods, came into being that were the ones that are most dominant. It didn't matter. And that's where we have a huge difference, in Christianity. We hold to the fact, what is it? Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. He says it all over scripture, and he's in complete control, in his his ethic and his love endures forever, and his love is for all humanity. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. All commandments is summed up into this. That's it.
Yeah, there's another similarity. You're talking about how that there's like really big people, Ron, and you're affirming this. They also have children, some of which may be good, or some of which may be evil. Mormonism has that. Of course, Jesus and Lucifer were brothers. That had a falling out and had a big battle. I don't know if you realize this, but the Watchtower taught the same thing at one point in their 1932 Watchtower, page 76. They write, these two mighty creatures, the Logos and Lucifer, that would be Jesus and Lucifer, were brothers, according to the Watchtower. So they taught the same thing, and they get that also from Mideastern religions.
Yeah, exactly. They even, and another thing, the gods went to war with each other. And the Egyptians also had the right to assert the gods anytime they felt like their king was not in the right place. Because again, the king was the viceroy. He was the representative of the gods. So essentially, if you were in disagreement with the king, you were in disagreement with the gods, which meant that you can go to war. And that's where you get a lot of that's how you see a lot of similarities in the Greek mythology stories as well. You know, they go to war with each other, and when they die, they can either give birth to new kids from bloodshed and all new gods from bloodshed and all these different things. You know, there's a whole lot of it really just makes your head spin, all the different things, you know, that you'd have to wrap your brain around for it to make sense.
And these were considered like normal back then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's something else.
Yeah. And not only did they have the same, not only were they big people, but they had all the same flaws.
Yeah.
People did, you know, that people do. Well, I forget which of the ancient flood epics. I mean, it's astonishing that every single culture on the face of the earth, ancient culture, had a flood epic. We're talking not just ancient in the Eastern Hemisphere, but the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Incas. They had flood epics. I mean, that kind of points to a common source of humanity. And one of the ones, I forget whether it was the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Atrahasis epic. Gilgamesh. It's basically the flood is caused because the gods are sick and tired of all the racket that people are making down on earth. I mean, we're just too noisy for them. We're disturbing their sleep. And yet, so it's kind of weird. It's kind of almost humorous, but then you come to the end, and one of the most tragic laments I've ever read at the end of this flood epic is, that something else had happened to humanity. That the flood had never come. It was like the author went on and on about, if only some other way, if only some other catastrophe the gods had sent instead of this. And I'm thinking, wow, the flood sure made a big impact. Even though they have it all messed up, they have the account all distorted, and they've taken the God of the Bible out and replaced their own gods. Surely it still was reverberating down through history.
Well, and that's important because we have that in most cultures have to somehow include the God of Scripture into what they're doing, a modified version. So they sort of pick and choose from the Bible, and we have that in the modern church today. And you know what, we have a sponsor that kind of addresses that as well.
Well, you know, you want to give freedom of choice, right? And that's what it's all about. So the question is, are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Well, does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sabellian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. Yes, the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Be there.
I love the Church of Smorgasbordianism.
It's a wonderful ministry. Look at all the choice you get.
Oh, the choice you get. Exactly. So, what about things? Does it impact, say, Word Faith, New Apostolic Reformation? Does this impact that, or does it just impact cults like Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and those kinds of groups?
It can affect anyone because of the fact that all have fallen short of the glory of God and sinned. At the end of the day, it's going to be a temptation. It's going to be a hard struggle to not succumb to and blend what the secular world teaches with what God teaches. No matter, even as a Christian, and sometimes people will raise that thing against us, as we minister, well, who's to say that Christianity is the one true, religion, or what about what Christians have done throughout history? What about those who have hurt others? Or what about, all of the holy wars and all these types of things, and I say to that, I simply say, you know what? You're absolutely right, because those things have happened, and I will also attest to you that no Christian is perfect, just like, any other person on the planet. But the one biggest difference that we have is that we follow a savior who actually is God and actually did prove himself God.
Mm-hmm.
And he's resurrected and he's alive. And the other thing of that we have with that is his grace. He understands that we are broken beyond repair, and even our wisdom and our brains don't function the way that they should, even as we follow him sometimes. So we need that grace, and we need that repentance to live in a way that, as his spirit poured out, as it said he would in Ezekiel 32:26, that he would move within us, give us a new heart and a new spirit, to move us and enable us to do his will. So at the end of the day, the one true God will move through those who truly trust and believe upon his son, Jesus Christ, at the end of the day. And he gives grace even when we mess up. We can pick ourselves up and repent from that. So it definitely affects everyone, even Christians. It's a struggle, to not walk away from faith. It's a very big struggle.
We always prefer the God of our own imagination or somebody else's imagination to the God of the Bible. As sinners, I think back on that flood epic. Well, it makes the gods who replace the God of the Bible, it makes them look petty and stupid, even to rain down a devastating flood just because humans are making too much racket. And then, of course, the complaint, the lament at the end suggests that this was totally unfair. And of course, yeah, if that's the only reason the gods destroyed you, then yeah, that does seem kind of unfair. But this is what false religion always does. It charges the God of the Bible with unfairness and replaces him with a deity more to our liking, more to the liking of our selfish nature.
Well, and one of the points is you're pointing out that some will say, well, look at the things the church has done down through history. At least for me, I can't really comment on anybody else, but for me, I don't use what other religions do that's evil any more than I want to obfuscate and say that Christians didn't do bad things. I think if we believe the Bible to be true, and I do, it teaches us that we are sinners by nature and by choice. And anything you point to is an example demonstrating what the Bible says is true on that issue. So the question isn't behavior necessarily, it is it true? Right? Is the revelation that you have of God true or false? That is what matters, because in the end, if Christianity is true, then there is only one way to be with God in the end. If Christianity is not true, then all bets are off. Do whatever you want.
And the Bible never tries to hide the fact that believers are sinners. And even after we're believers, we still screw up. We still disappoint each other. We still,
especially you, Ron.
I know. and yeah, so, well, like I say, it's I think you and I sometimes only two Christians left, and I'm not sure about me, but but anyways, it's like, yeah, it's like, of all people, we as Christians should be able to say, yeah, you're right. We are. We don't just have feet of clay. I was reading somebody this week said we're just made of clay. We are,
Right.
We have this treasure in earthen vessels, Paul says, and he's talking about us. Our flesh is like this clay pot that is breakable. Any one of us at any point, at any moment, would just fall apart from the grace of God. And,
my friend Dwayne Mignani put it this way: we're made from dust. When we die, we return to dust. In the meantime, we're just dust walking around.
Mm-hmm.
We're bags of dust.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it sounds like you're going to be delivering something that a lot of people are going to want to hear, and we're going to encourage as many to attend. I don't know, is your lecture being held simultaneously with other people's?
Yes, there will be 5 going on at a time during the workshop time. So we'll
just take down the signs of all the other ones, because I think everybody's going to want to. I'm just kidding, but I don't know if I'm going to get there on time, but I am driving over there, and I hope to see you.
Yes, absolutely. I look forward to it.
All right, Ron, you want to walk us out of here?
Well, you could walk, run, chase, whatever. Hold on a second here. Let me get this up and running. So we want to
stroll, right?
Roll and stroll. Yeah, we want to give credit where credit is due. So our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormons archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is O.D. Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are totally responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove it in a court of law. Many have tried, all have failed. So...
In fact, I need to go see Emergency Manicure Productions here fairly soon. I got to get my nails fixed. So
you better take care of it. They're there for you. Yes.
All right, William. I'll look forward to seeing you in person in a few weeks here. And I bet if you have like fudge at your workshop or something, you'll have an overwhelming attendance. But don't fudge on the facts.
Okay, I'm going to get there early if he's going to do that.
All right. And with that, we are out of here.